After 35 years as a neurosurgeon, I thought I had seen the absolute worst of humanity. I have seen victims of gang violence, domestic abuse, and terrible accidents. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepares you for standing on your own balcony and watching your son-in-law crush a white pill into your anniversary champagne. He wanted to kill me for my fortune. Instead, I let him drink his own poison. 5 minutes later, he was convulsing on the floor, and I was just getting started. If you want to know how I turned the tables on the man who tried to murder me in front of 200 witnesses, hit that like button and subscribe right now. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from. This is the story of how I performed my most dangerous operation, yet without a single scalpel. I stood in the shadows of the second-floor limestone balcony of my estate in Connecticut. Below me, 200 of the East Coast elite were drinking my wine and eating my food. It was my 40th wedding anniversary, a milestone that should have been filled with joy. But my eyes were not on the jazz band or the ice sculptures. My eyes were locked on Brandon Cole, the man who married my daughter Victoria 5 years ago. I watched him with the same detached precision I used when looking at an MRI scan of a terminal tumor. He was standing near the serving station, looking nervous. He checked over his shoulder once, twice. Then, with a speed that would have impressed a magician, he pulled a small packet from his tuxedo pocket. I saw the white powder fall. It dissolved instantly into the vintage crystal flute that had my name, Harrison, etched into the glass. It was the special toast glass my wife Evelyn had commissioned just for me. Brandon swirled the liquid gently, his face composing itself into a mask of filial devotion. Then his phone lit up. I was close enough to see the glow, and with my vision still sharp at 70, I read the text he typed. Done. 10 minutes left. Prepare the car. My heart rate did not increase. My hands did not shake. Panic is for amateurs, and I have not been an amateur since my residency in 1980. That powder was likely fentanyl or a similar synthetic opioid. He wanted to induce a respiratory arrest that would look like a heart attack or a stroke typical for a man of my age. He wanted me dead or incapacitated before the night was over. I didn't scream. I didn't call security. I simply adjusted my cufflinks, took a deep breath, and activated what I call the operating room protocol. Cold, logical, ruthless. I turned and began my descent down the grand marble staircase. As I reached the bottom step, the noise of the party washed over me. Laughter, clinking glasses, the false warmth of high society. Evelyn was across the room accepting compliments on her dress, completely oblivious that the snake she welcomed into our family was about to strike. Brandon saw me approaching. He grabbed the silver tray with the 2 special glasses. A bright, predatory smile plastered itself across his face. Dad. There you are, he said, his voice dripping with synthetic charm. We were all waiting for you. You can't start the speeches without the guest of honor. He held the tray out to me. The poisoned glass was on the right. I knew it because I had watched him place it there, and I could see a tiny, almost imperceptible difference in the way the bubbles were rising slightly slower due to the density of the added powder. Thank you, Brandon, I said, my voice steady. I reached out. At that exact moment, a wealthy real estate investor named Mr. Sterling called out Brandon's name from behind him. It was the distraction I needed. Brandon turned his head for a fraction of a second to acknowledge the potential client. That was all I needed. 35 years of microsurgery have given me hands that are faster than the human eye. In the blink of an eye, I performed the switch. My hand crossed over, sliding the safe glass to the right and the tainted glass to the left. It was a movement so fluid, so practiced, that even if he had been looking, he might have missed it. It is the same sleight of hand I used to clamp a bleeding artery before the monitor even registered the drop in pressure. When Brandon turned back, I was holding the glass on the left. He beamed, thinking I had taken the bait. He picked up the glass on the right. The glass that was meant to end my life. To 40 years of happiness, Brandon said, raising the poison to his lips. And to your health, Dad. May you be with us for a long, long time. To health, I replied, staring directly into his greedy eyes. You never know when it might run out. He drank. He drained the entire glass in one long swallow, eager to get the job done. I took a polite sip of mine. It was excellent champagne. A shame he had ruined a glass of it. The jazz band stopped playing. The room went silent as Brandon tapped a spoon against an empty glass. It was time for the toast. He stepped up to the microphone, the center of attention. He loved the spotlight almost as much as he loved other people's money. Friends, family, he began, his voice booming. We are here to celebrate Harrison and Evelyn, two pillars of this community, two people who have taught me so much about love and sacrifice. I stood a few feet away, watching him closely. I was counting the seconds. 1 minute. He was fine. 2 minutes. He started to sweat. He loosened his tie slightly. 3 minutes. His speech began to falter. He repeated the word sacrifice 3 times. I just want to say that the legacy is... He stopped. He blinked rapidly. From where I stood, I could see his pupils. They had constricted to pinpoints. Meiosis, a classic sign of opioid toxicity. The drug was hitting his system fast. His brain was forgetting how to tell his lungs to breathe. Brandon swayed on his feet. The crowd chuckled nervously, thinking he had perhaps indulged in too much wine before the speech. Evelyn looked at me confused. Brandon, she whispered. He looked at me. Confusion turned to terror. He tried to point a finger at me, but his arm was too heavy. The glass. He slurred his words, thick and heavy like mud. Then gravity took over. His knees buckled. He crashed forward, taking the table with him. The sound of shattering crystal and china echoed like a gunshot. The crowd screamed. Victoria, my daughter, shrieked his name. I didn't hesitate. I sprang into action, not as a father-in-law, but as the first responder. Stand back, I shouted, my command voice cutting through the panic. I am a doctor. I knelt beside him. He was seizing now, foam gathering at the corners of his mouth. His eyes were rolling back into his head. To the onlookers, I looked like a desperate man trying to save his family. I loosened his collar. I checked his airway. But my hands were doing something else entirely. I slid my hand into the inner pocket of his tuxedo jacket. I felt the small, crinkled texture of paper. I pulled it out, hiding it instantly in my own palm before sliding it into my pocket. It was the wrapper of the powder. Evidence. Only then did I begin the chest compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4. I pushed down on his ribs, feeling the fragile cage of his chest beneath my hands. Call 911. I bellowed to the stunned waiter. Tell them we have a cardiac arrest. I looked down at Brandon's face. He was turning blue. The cyanosis was setting in. He was dying right there on my Persian rug, killed by his own greed. And as I pumped his chest, keeping him just barely on the edge of life, I leaned in close to his ear so only he could hear me over the chaos. I saw you, Brandon, I whispered, my voice cold as ice. I saw you drop it. And now you are going to tell me everything. His eyes flickered open for a second, filled with absolute horror, before they rolled back again. The sirens were wailing in the distance, getting closer. The party was over. But the war had just begun. The wail of the sirens was deafening, drowning out the string quartet that had been playing only moments before. It was a cacophony of chaos that shattered the curated perfection of my anniversary party. Victoria was screaming a high-pitched primal sound of distress that grated against my nerves. She was clutching Brandon's limp hand as the paramedics loaded him onto the gurney, her tears ruining the silk of her designer gown. Evelyn, my wife of 40 years, had not been able to withstand the shock. She had fainted gracefully into the arms of a waiter, her face pale as the linen napkins. I watched it all with a detachment that had served me well through decades of trauma surgery. I did not panic. I calculated. I stepped into the back of the ambulance before anyone could stop me. "I am a doctor," I stated firmly, flashing my credentials to the driver. "I am riding with him." Victoria tried to climb in after me, sobbing about her husband, but I blocked the door. I told her to stay with her mother to make sure Evelyn was safe and to meet us at City General. She nodded, terrified and obedient, and the doors slammed shut, sealing me in with the man who had tried to murder me. The ambulance lurched forward, lights flashing against the dark Connecticut trees. The interior smelled of antiseptic and stale fear. I looked at the paramedic attending to Brandon. I recognized him immediately. It was Kevin, a young man who had rotated through my neurosurgery department 3 years ago as a student. He recognized me too. His eyes widened behind his glasses. "Dr. Prescott," he said, his voice filled with deference. "We have a suspected cardiac arrest." "No, Kevin," I said, my voice low and urgent, barely audible over the siren. "Look at his pupils. They are pinpoint. Look at his respiratory rate. It is depressed. This is not cardiac. This is opioid toxicity." Kevin looked at Brandon's face, then back at me. He hesitated. I leaned in closer, gripping his arm with a strength that surprised him. "Listen to me carefully. I need you to draw a full toxicology panel right now, blood and urine. Do it before you push any fluids that might dilute the sample. And Kevin, do not log this request in the main system yet. Just get the samples and hand them to me. Do you understand?" He looked at the dying man, then at the legendary surgeon commanding him. He nodded. He grabbed the needles and vials. I watched as the dark red blood flowed into the tubes. Liquid evidence. I took the vials and slipped them into the inside pocket of my tuxedo, right next to the empty wrapper I had taken from Brandon. The puzzle pieces were coming together. We arrived at the emergency room bay in a blur of motion. The doors burst open, and the trauma team took over. I followed them, not as a relative, but as a shadow. They wheeled him into Trauma Room 1. The air was thick with the beeping of monitors and the shouting of orders. I stood in the corner, arms crossed, watching the show. They intubated him. They hooked him up to the ECG. His heart rate was sluggish, barely keeping him alive. The attending physician, a woman I did not know, shouted for Narcan. Naloxone, the antidote to opioid overdose. It was exactly what I knew he needed. I watched the nurse inject the drug into his IV line. It takes only seconds for Narcan to work. It rips the opioids off the receptors in the brain with violence. It sends the addict into immediate precipitous withdrawal. It is not a gentle awakening. It is a resurrection of pain. Brandon gasped. His back arched off the gurney as if he had been electrocuted. A guttural choking sound ripped from his throat. His eyes flew open wide and bloodshot, scanning the room in wild terror. He was looking for death. He expected to see the gates of hell. Instead, he saw the fluorescent lights of the hospital. He saw the nurses holding him down, and then his eyes locked on me. I was standing at the foot of his bed, perfectly still, my tuxedo unruffled. I looked him dead in the eye and offered a small, cold smile. The monitor beside him began to scream. Beep, beep, beep. His heart rate skyrocketed from 40 to 150 in the span of a breath. The machine wailed a warning of tachycardia. "He is crashing again," the nurse shouted, reaching for the crash cart. "No, he is not," I said calmly from my corner. "He is terrified." Brandon tried to sit up, fighting the restraints they had placed on his wrists. He pointed a shaking finger at me. Foam flecked his lips. His voice was a raspy shriek that silenced the entire room. Him, he screamed, choking on the intubation tube they were pulling out. It was him. He switched it. The doctors stopped. The nurses froze. Everyone turned to look at the distinguished older gentleman in the tuxedo. Brandon coughed violently, spitting up bile, but he didn't stop. He looked like a cornered rat. He tried to kill me, Brandon yelled, his voice rising to a hysterical pitch. That old man switched the glasses. I saw him. He poisoned me. That champagne was meant for him. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and absurd. But before I could respond, the double doors of the trauma room swung open. Evelyn and Victoria burst in, trailed by two uniformed police officers. They had arrived just in time to hear the man they loved accuse the man they relied on. Brandon, Victoria cried, rushing to his side. "Oh my God, you are alive!" Brandon clung to her, playing the victim with an Academy Award level of commitment. He pointed at me again, his hand trembling theatrically. "Vicky, get him away from me. Your father is a monster. He drugged my drink. I saw him switch the glasses right before the toast. He wants me dead. Me." Evelyn stopped in the middle of the room. Her makeup was smeared, her hair in disarray. She looked from her sobbing daughter to her frantic son-in-law. And finally she turned her gaze to me. I waited for her to defend me. I waited for my wife of 40 years to tell this liar that her husband was a savior, a healer, not a murderer. But I saw the doubt cloud her eyes. I saw the hesitation. Brandon was young, charming, and the father of the grandchildren she desperately wanted. I was the cold, distant surgeon who spent more time at the hospital than at home. "Why, Harrison," she whispered, the horror seeping into her voice. "Why would you do such a thing to him?" The betrayal hit me harder than any physical blow. She believed him. Without a shred of proof, she believed the man who had just tried to widow her. One of the police officers stepped forward. He was a large man with a tired face, holding a notepad. He looked at the chaos, then at me. "Sir," he said, his voice flat, "we have a serious accusation here. We need to ask you some questions." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I reached into the deep pocket of my jacket. The officer's hand twitched toward his holster, thinking I was reaching for a weapon. I moved slowly, deliberately. I pulled out the crystal champagne flute. I had carried it with me from the party, wrapped in a linen napkin. It was the glass Brandon had drunk from, the glass that still held the residue of the poison he had meant for me. "I suggest you take this into evidence, officer," I said, holding out the glass. "My son-in-law claims I poisoned him. This is the glass he drank from. It has his fingerprints on it. It has his saliva on the rim. And if you test the liquid remaining at the bottom, I guarantee you will find a lethal dose of fentanyl." The officer blinked, confused by my compliance. He took the glass carefully, bagging it. "If you poisoned him, sir." "Why would you bring us the murder weapon?" the officer asked, skepticism written all over his face. "Because, officer," I replied, staring at Brandon, who was now pale and sweating. "I am not the one who put the powder in the glass. I am just the one who refused to drink it." Brandon went white. He realized his mistake. He had admitted there was poison. He had admitted the glasses were switched. But he was betting on the fact that no one would believe I was fast enough or ruthless enough to turn the tables. He was betting on my family siding with him. And looking at Evelyn's fearful face, he might have been right. The officer sighed. He gestured toward the door. "We are going to need you to come down to the station, Dr. Prescott. We need to sort this out." I nodded. I adjusted my cuffs. I looked at my wife one last time. "Evelyn," I said, my voice devoid of emotion, "do not sign anything until I return. Do not give him access to the accounts." She turned away from me, moving to hold Brandon's hand. The line was drawn. I walked out of the hospital, flanked by police, leaving my family behind, with the snake they had chosen to protect. But as I sat in the back of the cruiser, I felt a strange sense of calm. They thought this was the end of me. They thought the old man was finished. They had no idea that I had just started the operation. And I never lose a patient on the table. The interrogation room smelled of stale coffee and desperation, a scent I knew well from waiting rooms, but never from this side of the table. Lucius Thorne, my attorney and old friend, walked in like he owned the precinct. He didn't ask for my release. He demanded it with the quiet authority of a man who knew where every skeleton in the city was buried. Within an hour, I was walking out into the cool night air, the heavy metal doors clanging shut behind me. Lucius offered to drive me to a hotel, suggesting it might be safer, but I refused. I needed to go home. I needed to go to the scene of the crime. The ride back to the estate was silent. The gravel crunched under the tires of Lucius's sedan as we pulled up to the main house. It stood dark and looming, a mausoleum of memories. Evelyn and Victoria were likely still at the hospital, playing the role of the grieving family, holding the hand of the monster. I told Lucius to wait in the car. I had a surgical procedure to perform, and I needed to work alone. I entered the house, bypassing the master bedroom. I went straight to the west wing, to the study I had foolishly allowed Brandon to use as his home office. It was a room I rarely entered, respecting a privacy he clearly did not deserve. The air inside was still heavy with the smell of his expensive, pretentious cologne. I locked the door behind me and turned on the desk lamp, keeping the light low. I didn't want to alert the staff. I moved to the large oil painting of a hunt scene hanging behind the desk. It was a cliché just like Brandon. I swung it open. There it was, a wall safe, a sleek digital model but with a manual override dial. He probably thought it was impenetrable. He didn't know about Mr. Graziano. Graziano was a patient of mine 20 years ago, a master safecracker who needed a delicate tumor removed from his cerebellum. He couldn't pay in cash, so he paid in knowledge. He taught me that every lock has a heartbeat, a rhythm. You just have to know how to listen. I pulled my old Littmann stethoscope from my pocket. I placed the diaphragm against the cold steel of the safe door right next to the dial. I closed my eyes and began to turn. Right. Left, right. The clicks were faint, almost imperceptible to the untrained ear, but to a man who has spent a lifetime listening to the whisper of blood flowing through capillaries, they were loud as gunshots. I felt the tumblers fall. 1, 2, 3. The final number clicked into place. I tried the handle. It yielded. The door swung open with a soft sigh. I didn't know what I expected to find. Cash, jewelry, stolen prescription pads, what I found was far worse. It was a paper trail of ruin. The safe was stacked with files. I pulled out the first stack. They were markers, gambling debts. The numbers were staggering. 500,000 to a casino in Atlantic City. 1.2 million to a private bookie in New York. Another 3 million in failed crypto investments. Brandon wasn't just living beyond his means, he was drowning in an ocean of debt. He was a desperate man, and desperate men do terrible things. But greed is common. What I found next was pure evil. Under the stack of debts lay a thick blue legal folder. The label on the front was typed in neat sans serif font Harrison Prescott, medical conservatorship. My hands, which had been steady during the switch on the balcony, began to tremble with a cold rage. I opened the file. It was a complete legal strategy, drafted by a lawyer I recognized as one of the sleaziest in Boston. The documents were dated 3 weeks ago. They outlined a narrative. It claimed I had been showing signs of rapid cognitive decline. It listed incidents that never happened, outbursts of anger, memory lapses, dangerous behavior, and then the linchpin, a medical directive. It stated that in the event of my incapacitation, specifically mentioning a stroke or cardiac event, Brandon Cole would be granted immediate and total power of attorney over my medical decisions, and crucially, my estate. He had planned it all. The drug in the champagne wasn't meant to kill me instantly. It was meant to cause a hypoxic brain injury. He wanted to turn me into a vegetable. He wanted to trap my mind in a useless body so he could step in as the grieving, dutiful son-in-law and take control of the $50 million empire I had built with my own hands. He didn't just want my money, he wanted my agency. He wanted to strip me of my humanity and leave me rotting in a bed while he spent my fortune paying off his bookies. I flipped through the pages. He had even selected the long-term care facility. It wasn't the high-end neurological center I had donated millions to. It was a mediocre warehouse for the dying in upstate New York, far away from my friends and colleagues who might ask questions. He was going to discard me like medical waste. I took out my phone and began photographing every page, every lie, every clause that gave him the right to liquidate my assets. My breath came in shallow, angry bursts. This was premeditated murder of the soul. But there was one more document at the bottom of the safe, a single sheet of paper that had slid under the felt lining. It was a printout of an email from an insurance broker. The subject line read, "Policy Activation Confirmation." I pulled it out and read the details. It was a term life insurance policy. The insured, Dr. Harrison Prescott. The face value, $10 million. The primary beneficiary, Brandon Cole. I looked at the date. The policy had gone into effect 48 hours ago. The puzzle was now complete. The conservatorship was Plan A. If the fentanyl simply brain damaged me, he would take control of the $50 million and bleed the estate dry while I lingered in a coma. But the insurance policy, that was Plan B. If the dose was too high, if my 70-year-old heart gave out, and I died on that Persian rug, he would walk away with $10 million in tax-free cash immediately. He had bet on both sides of the coin. Heads, I become a vegetable, and he wins. Tails, I die, and he wins. He looked at me, his father-in-law, the man who had welcomed him into his home and saw nothing but a payday. He didn't care if I lived or died as long as the check cleared. I stared at the paper in my hand. The ink was still crisp. $10 million. That was the price of my life to him. That was the value of 40 years of saving lives, of raising a daughter, of loving a wife. $10 million to pay for his mistakes. I carefully placed the papers back into the safe, arranging them exactly as I had found them. I closed the heavy steel door and spun the dial, locking his secrets away again. I reset the painting. I wiped the desk where I had touched it. I left the room precisely as it had been, a shrine to his treachery. I walked out of the house and back to Lucius's car. The night air felt different now. It didn't just smell of pine and ocean. It smelled of war. Brandon had tried to end my life tonight. He had tried to steal my future. But he had made a fatal error. He assumed the old surgeon was soft. He assumed I was just a checkbook with a pulse. He didn't know that you don't become the chief of neurosurgery by being passive. You do it by being smarter, faster, and more precise than everyone else in the room. I got into the passenger seat. Lucius looked at me, his face grim. "What did you find, Harrison?" he asked quietly. I looked at the dark windows of my home. I found the diagnosis, Lucius, and I said, my voice like granite. The patient has a malignant tumor, and we are going to have to cut it out before it kills the host. The grandfather clock in the foyer chimed 4 times, the sound echoing through the silent, empty house like a death knell. I sat in the wingback chair, facing the door, still wearing the tuxedo that bore the invisible stains of the night's treachery. I had not slept. I could not sleep. My mind was still racing, processing the documents in the safe, the contract on my life, and the realization that the enemy was already inside the gates. Then the heavy oak door creaked open. Evelyn stepped inside. She looked haggard. Her designer dress was wrinkled, her mascara smeared beneath eyes that were red and swollen from hours of crying. But as soon as she saw me sitting there in the shadows, her expression didn't soften with relief or concern. It hardened into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. She dropped her purse on the floor and marched toward me, her heels clicking sharply on the marble, a staccato rhythm of accusation. I stood up to meet her, perhaps foolishly, expecting a conversation, a chance to explain the evidence I had found. I didn't get the chance to speak. Her hand lashed out with a speed and violence I had never seen in 40 years of marriage. The slap cracked against my cheekbone, stinging and sharp. My head whipped to the side. I stood frozen, the physical pain nothing compared to the shock of who had delivered it. I slowly turned my face back to her. She was trembling, her chest heaving, her eyes blazing with a hatred I didn't recognize. "How dare you?" she hissed, her voice shaking. "How dare you show your face here after what you did to that boy, Evelyn?" I started keeping my voice low and controlled. "You need to listen to me. Brandon is not who you think he is." "Stop it!" she screamed, cutting me off. "Just stop your lies." "Brandon told me everything. He told me how you have been treating him, how you belittle him, how you threaten him. And tonight, you finally snapped, didn't you? You tried to kill him because you are a jealous, bitter old man." "Jealous," I repeated the word, tasting like ash in my mouth. "Jealous of a man who gambles away money he didn't earn." "I am not talking about money, Harrison," she spat. "I am talking about life. He is young. He is vibrant. He has a future. And you are just old. You are fading away, and you can't stand it. You can't stand that he is taking over. You are paranoid. You see enemies everywhere because your mind is going." Brandon was right. "You are sick. You are dangerous." I looked at the woman I had built a life with. I looked for the partner who had stood by me through residency, through the loss of my parents, through the raising of our daughter. She wasn't there. In her place was a stranger, a woman whose vanity and fear of aging had made her susceptible to the flattery of a predator. She didn't see a husband. She saw an obstacle to the fantasy family life Brandon had promised her. She believed the con artist because the con artist told her what she wanted to hear, while I only told her the cold, hard truth. "You believe him over me?" I asked quietly. "Over 40 years, Evelyn, he is the victim here." She sobbed, tears streaming down her face again. "He is lying in a hospital bed because of you. You are lucky he isn't pressing charges yet. You are lucky I am even speaking to you." I realized then that there was no point in arguing. Logic does not work on an infection. And Brandon had infected her mind completely. She was no longer my wife. She was his accomplice. I took a deep breath, forcing my heart rate to slow. I reverted to my training. When a patient is delirious, you do not fight them. You sedate them. You contain them. And you observe. "You are right, Evelyn," I lied, my voice dropping to a tone of defeated exhaustion. "I am tired. Maybe I am confused. It has been a long night." She looked at me, blinking, surprised by my sudden capitulation. The anger drained out of her, replaced by a smug, pitying look that was somehow worse. "Go to sleep, Evelyn," I said, stepping aside. "We can talk in the morning." She sniffed, wiping her nose with a tissue. "I am going to take a shower," she announced haughtily. "I need to wash this horrible night off me. And then I am going to bed in the guest room. I cannot bear to be in the same bed as you right now." She swept past me and headed up the stairs. I watched her go, my face stinging from her slap, my heart breaking in my chest. But my mind was already moving to the next step. I waited until I heard the distant sound of the shower turning on in the master bath. The water pressure in this old house caused the pipes to hum in a specific way. It was the sound of opportunity. I walked up the stairs, my steps silent on the carpet. I entered the master bedroom. Her purse was on the vanity. Her phone was sitting right on top of it, the screen dark. I picked it up. My hands, which had performed thousands of delicate incisions, did not tremble. I knew her passcode. It was our anniversary date. The irony was not lost on me. I unlocked the phone. I didn't look through her texts or photos. I didn't have time for voyeurism. I needed surveillance. Weeks ago, after noticing some odd withdrawals from our checking account, I had purchased a piece of high-end monitoring software. It was designed for parents to track their children, but in the hands of a suspicious spouse, it was a weapon. I had never installed it, hoping I was just being a paranoid old man. Tonight, I knew I wasn't. I downloaded the app from the cloud. It took less than a minute. I configured it to hide its icon to run invisibly in the background. It would record every call, every text, every keystroke, and transmit it directly to my secure server. I wiped the screen with my handkerchief to remove my fingerprints and placed the phone back exactly where I had found it, angled slightly toward the mirror, just as she always left it. I slipped out of the room just as the water stopped running. I went to my study on the other side of the house, locked the door, and put on my noise-canceling headphones. I opened my laptop and logged into the dashboard. The green light blinked. Connection established. Now I just had to wait. It didn't take long. 20 minutes later, the audio feed spiked. Evelyn was making a call. I adjusted the volume, pressing the headphones tighter against my ears, bracing myself for what I was about to hear. The phone rang twice. Then a groggy voice answered. It was Brandon. "Hello, oh Brandon, honey, it's me." Evelyn's voice came through thick with emotion. "Are you okay? Is the pain bad? I am okay." "Mom," Brandon said, his voice weak and pathetic. "Just headache. And I am scared." "Is he there?" "Is he in the house?" "He is here," she whispered, as if I were a monster lurking under the bed. "But don't worry. I put him in his place. He won't hurt you again. I promise." "Mom, we have to do something." Brandon urged, his voice suddenly gaining strength. "He is unstable. You saw him tonight. He is going to try to finish the job. We need to protect ourselves. We need that lawyer I told you about." "The shark." "Sharkman," Evelyn said. "Yes. I remember. But he is expensive, Mom. And my accounts, well, you know I can't access them right now." I sat there in the dark office, listening to the trap snap shut. "Don't you worry about money, my sweet boy," Evelyn said, her voice soothing. "I took care of it. While you were sleeping, I logged into the joint retirement fund. My blood ran cold. That fund was our nest egg. It was 40 years of savings. It was the money meant to care for us when we could no longer care for ourselves. I transferred $500,000 to your private account," she said casually, as if she were talking about buying groceries. "It went through an hour ago. You can hire Mr. Sharkman first thing in the morning. $500,000. $500,000. Gone. Just like that. Stolen by the woman who had sworn to love and cherish me, handed over to the man who had tried to murder me." "Thank you, Mom," Brandon said, and I could practically hear the smirk in his voice. "You are a lifesaver. Literally. We are going to get through this." Sharkman says with the incident tonight, we have a slam dunk case for dementia. "Dementia," Evelyn repeated, testing the word. "Yes," Brandon continued. "Rapid onset, paranoia, violence. It fits all the symptoms. We can petition the court for an emergency competency hearing. We can get him the help he needs, in a facility." "You mean a nursing home?" Evelyn asked, a tremor in her voice. "A specialized care facility," Brandon corrected smoothly. "A place where he can't hurt anyone, where he can't hurt himself, and where he can't control the money anymore. You would be doing him a kindness, Mom. He is obviously suffering." There was a long silence on the line. I held my breath, waiting, praying for a spark of loyalty, a memory of the man I really was. "You are right," Evelyn finally said, her voice steeling itself. "It is the only way. He is too far gone. We have to do it. For his own good." "For his own good," Brandon echoed. "Get some rest, Mom. We have a big day tomorrow. We are going to save this family." "I love you, son," she said. "I love you too, Mom." The line clicked dead. I took off the headphones and set them gently on the desk. The silence in the room was absolute, but inside my head, it was screaming. My wife hadn't just been tricked. She hadn't just been manipulated. She had just financed my destruction. She had emptied our future to pay for my imprisonment. She was going to help him paint me as a madman and lock me away in a facility until I died, all so they could pick the carcass of my fortune clean. I stared at the wall, seeing nothing. The pain was a physical weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. The betrayal was absolute. There was no going back from this. There was no misunderstanding to clear up. My marriage was dead. My wife was gone. There were only enemies left in this house. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark grounds of the estate. The sun would be up in a few hours, and when it rose, I would not be the victim they expected. I would not be the confused old man they wanted to pity and put away. They wanted a war. They wanted to play games with money and lawyers and medical diagnoses. Fine. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. It was 4:00 a.m., but I knew he would answer. Lucius Thorne didn't sleep when there was blood in the water. Harrison, his voice was rough with sleep, but instantly alert. "What happened? I found the leak, Lucius," I said, my voice devoid of any warmth. "It is coming from inside the hull. Evelyn just transferred $500,000 to Brandon to hire a lawyer. They are filing for a competency hearing. They want to put me in a home." There was a pause on the other end. Then the sound of a rustling sheet and a lamp clicking on. "Be at my office at 8, Lucius said. "Bring everything. And Harrison, yes, prepare yourself. If we do this, we have to burn it all down. There is no saving the house if you want to kill the termites." I looked at the wedding photo on my desk, taken 40 years ago. 2 smiling young people who had no idea how it would end. I picked it up and dropped it into the wastebasket. "Light the match." "Lucius," I said, "I am ready." The morning sun hit the glass facade of the Thorne & Associates building with a blinding intensity that felt appropriate for what I was about to do. At 8 o'clock sharp, I sat across from Lucius Thorne in his corner office. The city of Boston sprawled out beneath us, waking up to a day of commerce and routine, unaware that high above the streets, a financial execution was taking place. Lucius did not offer me coffee or small talk. He knew why I was here. On the mahogany desk between us sat a stack of documents thick enough to choke a horse. It was the nuclear option. 30 years ago, when I first started making serious money as a surgeon, Lucius had insisted I insert a specific clause into the Prescott family trust. He called it the Doomsday Protocol. At the time, I laughed, thinking I would never need to protect my fortune from my own wife and child. Today, I wasn't laughing. I was grateful for his cynicism. I picked up the heavy fountain pen. It felt cold and solid in my hand, much like a scalpel. Lucius slid the first document toward me. "This is the immediate suspension of all joint accounts," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Once you sign this, the flow of capital stops. Every credit card, every checking account, every line of credit attached to your social security number that Evelyn or Brandon has access to will be terminated." "Are you sure, Harrison?" I looked at the paper. I thought of Evelyn transferring $500,000 to the man who tried to kill me. I thought of Brandon's smirk as he handed me the poisoned glass. I didn't hesitate. I signed my name with a flourish. The ink was black and permanent. Next, Lucius said, sliding a second document over, is the revocation of privileges for all real estate holdings. This notifies security at the Martha's Vineyard House, the Aspen Chalet, and the city penthouse that all existing keys and codes are void. It authorizes the removal of any unauthorized occupants. I signed. And finally, Lucius said, presenting the last page, "This is the legal notification to all medical and insurance providers that you have contested the power of attorney and are freezing the policy beneficiary status pending a fraud investigation." I signed that one twice. With each stroke of the pen, I felt a weight lifting off my chest. It was the sensation of clamping a bleeding artery. The patient might scream, the tissue might protest, but the bleeding had to stop to save the life. When I finished, Lucius hit the enter key on his laptop. "It is done," he said. "The banks are updating their systems now. It will take effect in less than 5 minutes." I stood up and walked to the window. I checked my watch. It was 8:15. Breakfast time at the hospital. 3 miles away in the VIP suite of City General, the consequences of my signature were arriving on a silver platter, or rather, the lack thereof. I wasn't there to see it, but I knew the protocol of that hospital better than anyone. I had practically built the neurosurgery wing. Brandon would be waking up hungry and entitled. He would pick up the bedside phone and dial room service. He would order the lobster Benedict and the fresh squeezed juice, putting it on the Platinum American Express card. He carried the one that was essentially a direct line to my wallet. 5 minutes later, the phone in my pocket buzzed. I ignored it. 2 minutes later, it buzzed again. Then a third time. I finally pulled it out. It was Evelyn. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. I wanted them to marinate in the reality of their situation. I wanted them to feel the first pinch of the tourniquet. When the phone rang a fourth time, I answered. I put it on speaker so Lucius could hear. Harrison Evelyn's voice shrieked through the speaker, frantic and breathless. "Harrison, there is a mistake. A terrible mistake." "Good morning, Evelyn," I said, my voice calm. "My card," she gasped. "I went to the cafeteria to get coffee and it was declined. The machine said stolen, and then the nurse came in. They are trying to move Brandon, move him where I asked, feigning mild interest. To the general ward, Harrison. To a shared room with 3 other people. They said his insurance has been flagged and the credit card on file for the VIP suite was rejected. They canceled his breakfast order. They are treating us like indigents, you have to call them. Fix this immediately." "There is nothing to fix, Evelyn," I replied. "What do you mean?" she cried. "I mean that I have cut you off," I said. "I froze the accounts. I canceled the cards. You used my money to hire a lawyer to destroy me. Did you really think I would keep financing your war against me?" There was a stunned silence on the other end. Then the sound of sputtering indignation. "You can't do this," she wailed. "I am your wife. That is our money." "It was our money when you were my partner," I said. "Now that you are my enemy, it is my money. And as for Brandon, he is an adult. If he wants a VIP suite, he can pay for it with his own gambling winnings." "Oh, wait. He doesn't have any." "Harrison, please," she sobbed, changing tactics to manipulation. "He is in pain. He needs rest." "You are being cruel." "Cruelty is poisoning a man at his own anniversary party, Evelyn. This is just economics." Suddenly there was a scuffling sound on the other end of the line. The phone was snatched away. Then I heard the voice I despised more than anything in the world. "Listen to me, you old fossil," Brandon snarled. His voice was raspy from the intubation, but the venom was potent. "You think this is funny? You think you can starve me out?" "I think I just did, Brandon," I replied. "Enjoy the hospital food. I hear the gelatin is particularly good on Tuesdays." "You are making a big mistake," Brandon hissed. "You think you are untouchable because you have the bank codes. You forgot something, Harrison. You forgot about the basement." My hand tightened on the phone. The basement was where I kept the archives. 40 years of patient files that I was legally required to keep stored in fireproof boxes. "I don't know what you are talking about," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "Don't play dumb with me." Dr. Brandon laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "While you were busy playing the perfect host last week, I was doing some reading. I found the box marked 1998. November. The Falcone file. The blood drained from my face. Lucius looked up, seeing my expression change. He didn't know about Falcone. No one knew about Falcone. I found the operative notes. Harrison Brandon continued, sensing he had struck a nerve, or rather, the lack of them. I found the scans. Gunshot wound to the parietal lobe. But the police report you filed, it said accidental fall, trauma from a staircase. You lied to the police. You covered up a mob hit to save a gangster's son. That was a long time ago, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but my heart was hammering against my ribs. It doesn't matter, Brandon gloated. There is no statute of limitations on being a fraud in the court of public opinion. Imagine what the medical board will do when they find out the great Dr. Prescott falsified medical records to protect the mafia. Imagine the headlines. Surgeon to the stars was a mob doctor. Your legacy will be trash. What do you want, Brandon? I asked through gritted teeth. I want the accounts unlocked, he demanded. I want the cards reactivated. And I want $5 million transferred to an offshore account by noon today, or else I send copies of those files to every newspaper in Boston. You are blackmailing me, I stated. I am negotiating, he corrected. You tried to kill me with that champagne switch. Now I am just ensuring my survival. You have 4 hours, Harrison. Tick-tock. The line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly to the desk. The silence in Lucius's office was absolute. Lucius stared at me, his sharp eyes analyzing my reaction. Is it true? Lucius asked quietly. I looked at my friend. I couldn't lie to him. Not now. It was 1998, Lucius, I said, my voice heavy with the weight of a 20-year-old secret. They came to my house in the middle of the night. Dante Falcone's son. He was bleeding out. They put a gun to Victoria's head. She was only 18. They said if I didn't operate right there on the kitchen table, they would kill her. Lucius closed his eyes and let out a long breath. So you operated, he said. I saved the boy's life, I replied. And then I forged the intake records when we transferred him to the hospital to make it look like an accident. I did it to keep my family alive. And now your son-in-law is using that act of survival to bury you, Lucius concluded. Yes. This complicates things, Lucius said, tapping his pen on the desk. Blackmail is a crime, Harrison. But if he releases those documents, the investigation alone will ruin you. The medical board will strip your license posthumously or not. Your reputation will be destroyed. I stood up and buttoned my jacket. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold resolve. Brandon had made a fatal miscalculation. He thought threatening me with a scandal would make me fold. He forgot that the man whose secret he was holding was not just a patient. He was a debt that had never been called in. I am not going to pay him, Lucius, I said. Then what are you going to do? Lucius asked. I am going to make a house call, I said, walking toward the door. Brandon thinks he uncovered a skeleton. He doesn't realize he just woke up a dragon. I left the office and took the elevator down to the garage. I didn't get into my car immediately. I stood in the shadows pulling an old burner flip phone from the glove compartment of my car. I kept it for emergencies. This was an emergency. I dialed a number I hadn't used in 2 decades. It rang once. Pronto, a deep, gravelly voice answered. Dante, I said. It is the doctor. There was a pause, a silence filled with respect and memory. Dr. Prescott, the voice said, warmer now. It has been a lifetime. Is everything all right? No, Dante, I said. There is a problem. Someone found the files from that night. He is threatening to expose everything. He is threatening to expose you. Who is he? Dante asked. The warmth was gone, replaced by the chill of a grave. His name is Brandon Cole, I said. He is at City General Hospital, room 402. Consider it handled, Dr. Dante said. No one touches the man who saved my life. I hung up the phone and snapped it shut. Brandon wanted to play gangster. He was about to find out that there are levels to this game that a real estate broker could not even comprehend. I got into my car and started the engine. The financial attack was just the opening salvo. Now I was calling in the cavalry. But even as I drove out of the garage, I knew this wasn't over. Brandon wouldn't go down without a fight, and with Evelyn on his side, he still had one card left to play. The courts. I checked the time. It was 9:30. The real war was just beginning. The drive to the North End was a journey back in time, forcing me to relive the one night I had spent 20 years trying to forget. It was November of 1998, a night battered by a freezing rain that lashed against the windows of our old brownstone. I was younger then, at the peak of my career, arrogant enough to believe I could fix anything with a scalpel. But when the front door burst open at 2 in the morning, I learned that some things cannot be fixed, only survived. 2 men in dark coats had dragged a bleeding boy into my foyer, leaving a trail of crimson on the hardwood. Another man older with eyes like flint had put a gun to my head. He told me his son had been shot in a dispute that could not be made public. He told me that if I called the police or if his son died, my wife and my teenage daughter Victoria would be buried before sunrise. I did not have a choice. That is what the ethics boards and the public never understand about survival. There is no morality when a gun is pointed at your child's bedroom door. I turned my dining room table into an operating theater. I sterilized instruments with vodka and boiling water. I opened that boy's skull under the dim light of a chandelier, removing a .22 caliber bullet that had lodged millimeters from his motor strip. I saved his life. And the next morning, when we transferred him to the hospital under a fake name, I wrote the lie that was now threatening to destroy me. I wrote that he had fallen down a flight of stairs. I falsified a federal document to protect my family from execution. It was a crime, yes. But it was the only way to keep breathing. Now Brandon thought he could use that act of desperate love to paint me as a monster. He thought he had found a smoking gun. He didn't realize he was pointing it at himself. I pulled my car up to the curb in front of Gennaro's, a nondescript Italian restaurant that had stood on this corner since before I was born. The windows were tinted, the sign flickering. To the average passerby, it was just a place to get veal parmesan. To those who knew, it was the unofficial office of Dante Falcone. I stepped out of the car, adjusting my coat. I didn't feel fear. I had faced death in that dining room 20 years ago. Facing Dante now was not a confrontation, it was a reunion. The restaurant was empty save for a few men sitting at a corner table who stopped talking as I entered. The smell of garlic and simmering tomato sauce filled the air, a scent that strangely calmed my nerves. A man in a sharp suit approached me, blocking my path. He was big, his hands hanging loose by his sides, ready for violence. "I am here to see Dante," I said, my voice steady. "Tell him it is the doctor." The man looked me up and down, checking for a wire for a weapon. Then a voice boomed from the back of the room. "Let him through, Marco." I walked past the guard and into the private dining area in the back. Dante Falcone sat at the head of a long table covered in a white cloth. He was no longer the bleeding boy on my table. He was a man of 40, powerful, immaculate, in a tailored suit, radiating an aura of absolute authority. He stood up as I approached, a gesture of respect that silenced his bodyguards. The scar on his temple was barely visible, a thin white line hidden by his hairline, the only evidence of the night I had held his life in my hands. "Dr. Prescott," Dante said, extending a hand that wore a ring worth more than Brandon's entire existence. "It has been a long time. You look well. I wish I could say the same for my circumstances." "Dante," I replied, shaking his hand. "I need a consult." Dante motioned for me to sit. He poured me a glass of wine himself, dismissing his men with a subtle wave. We were alone. "I heard you had some trouble at your party," Dante said, his eyes sharp. "A medical emergency." "An attempted murder," I corrected. "My son-in-law tried to poison me with fentanyl." Dante's expression darkened. The jovial host vanished, replaced by the ruthless pragmatist. "That is a messy business, doctor. Family. It is always the family that cuts the deepest." "He survived," I continued. "And now he is cornered. He went digging, Dante. He found the files from 1998. He knows about the bullet. He knows about the police report I forged. Dante went very still. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He set his wine glass down without a sound. "He knows about me," Dante asked softly. "He knows everything," I said. "He is threatening to release the files to the press. He wants to destroy my reputation, to force me to unlock my bank accounts. But if those files come out, Dante, they don't just hurt me. They reopen an investigation into the shooting. They bring heat to you and your father's legacy. He is using your life as leverage against me." Dante stared at the tablecloth for a long moment. When he looked up, his eyes were cold enough to freeze oxygen. "This man," he said, his voice a low rumble. "This Brandon Cole, he does not understand the rules of the game. He thinks this is about money. He does not know he is touching the third rail." "I need him silenced," Dante, I said, meeting his gaze. "Not killed. I don't want a murder investigation pointing back to me. I just need him to understand that the files from 1998 are not a weapon he can use. I need him to be too terrified to ever speak your name or mine again." Dante nodded slowly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a phone. "You saved my life, Harrison," he said, using my first name for the first time. "I owe you a debt that can never be fully repaid. No one touches the man who saved the Falcone heir. Go home, doctor. Sleep. By the time this man wakes up tomorrow, the only thing he will want to do with those files is eat them." I left the restaurant feeling a weight lift, but another one settle in its place. I had just solicited the help of organized crime. I had crossed a line that a man of the law, a man of medicine, should never cross. But as I drove back through the city, watching the skyline glitter against the dark, I realized that the line had been erased the moment Brandon dropped that pill into my glass. There were no rules anymore, only survival. I arrived back at my estate just after 10 o'clock. The gates opened automatically, the driveway winding through the manicured lawns that Evelyn loved so much. The house was dark, save for the porch light. I parked the car and walked up the steps, my keys in my hand. That was when I saw it. Taped to the front door, glaring white against the dark wood, was a thick envelope. It wasn't a delivery. It was legal service. My heart hammered against my ribs as I ripped it open. I stood there on the porch, reading the document under the yellow light. It was an emergency ex parte petition, a court order. The petitioners were listed clearly: Evelyn Prescott and Brandon Cole. The respondent, Dr. Harrison Prescott. The nature of the action: immediate competency hearing and temporary conservatorship. I scanned the legal jargon, my mind racing. They weren't waiting for the blackmail to work. They weren't waiting for me to cave. They had launched a simultaneous strike. While Brandon distracted me with threats of the past, Evelyn had gone to a judge. They claimed I was suffering from acute paranoid delusions, that I had violently attacked a family member, and that I was dissipating the marital assets in a manic episode. They cited the freezing of the accounts as proof of my irrational behavior. The judge had signed it. The hearing was scheduled for 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. I lowered the paper, my hand shaking with rage. This was their endgame. They didn't just want the money. They wanted to erase me. If the judge ruled against me tomorrow, I would lose everything. My right to access my own money, my right to choose my own medical treatment, my right to live in my own home. I would become a ward of the state, or worse, a ward of Brandon Cole. He would have the legal authority to commit me to a facility, to drug me into compliance, to silence me forever. Dante could stop Brandon from leaking the files, but he couldn't stop a court order. He couldn't intimidate a judge in open court. This was a battle I had to fight, in the light of day, using the only weapons I had left: my mind and the truth. I looked at my watch. It was nearly midnight. I had 9 hours to prepare a defense against my own family, against a team of lawyers paid for, with my own retirement savings, and against a medical diagnosis that was entirely fabricated. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the foyer. The house felt like a tomb. I walked past the living room where Evelyn was likely sleeping, dreaming of her victory. I went to my study and turned on the lights. I didn't call Lucius. There was no time to strategize with a lawyer. This required a surgeon. I sat down at my desk and pulled out a fresh legal pad. I placed the court summons on one side and the toxicology vials I had stolen from the ambulance on the other. They wanted to prove I was incompetent. They wanted to prove I was crazy. Fine. I would walk into that courtroom and I would perform the most delicate, high-stakes dissection of my career. I would take apart their lies layer by layer until there was nothing left but the rotting core of their greed. I picked up my pen. The operation begins at 0900 hours. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, a windowless chamber of polished oak and fluorescent lighting that felt more like a coffin than a hall of justice. I sat alone at the defendant's table, my back straight, my hands clasped calmly before me. Across the aisle, the performance had already begun, and I had to admit the production value was high. Brandon was seated in a wheelchair, a cervical collar wrapped tightly around his neck, despite the fact that his only injury was a self-inflicted opioid overdose. He wore a faded sweater, 2 sizes too big, designed to make him look frail and victimized. Beside him sat Victoria, my daughter, her face a masterpiece of sorrow, clutching a packet of tissues she used to dab at dry eyes every time the judge looked her way. And behind them, like a vulture perching on a tombstone, sat Evelyn. She refused to look at me, staring fixedly at the back of Brandon's head as if he were the Messiah she had paid $500,000 to resurrect. Their lawyer, a man named Mr. Kane, who wore a suit that cost more than my first car, was currently guiding their expert witness through a testimony that was nothing short of fiction. Dr. Aris, a psychiatrist with a strip mall practice and a reputation for being available to the highest bidder, was pointing at a blown-up chart on an easel. He claimed it represented the typical progression of rapid-onset dementia and paranoid schizophrenia in septuagenarians. He used words like cognitive rigidity and persecutory delusions with the confidence of a man who had rehearsed his lines in front of a mirror. He looked at the judge, a tired-looking woman named Judge Holloway, and stated with grave concern that my recent behavior, the freezing of assets, the physical altercation with my son-in-law, the wild accusations of poisoning, were textbook symptoms of a brain that was eating itself. He claimed I was a danger to myself and others, a man whose frontal lobe had atrophied to the point where impulse control was non-existent. I listened to every word, dissecting his statements with the same precision I once used to separate a tumor from a brainstem. I watched the judge. She was nodding. She was buying it. To her, I was just another old man who had lost his grip, a sad story that needed to be managed by the younger, saner generation. When Mr. Kane finally rested his case, he looked at me with a smugness that made my fingers itch. Judge Holloway turned her gaze to me. She looked over her spectacles, expecting to see a confused geriatric Dr. Prescott. She said, her voice gentle, almost patronizing. I see you have not retained counsel for this hearing. Given the gravity of the allegations and the request for a conservatorship, I strongly advise you to seek legal representation. I can grant a continuance of 24 hours if you need to find a lawyer. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. I did not lean on the table. I did not stutter. Thank you. Your Honor, I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room. But that will not be necessary. I have spent 40 years in operating rooms where a split-second decision determines life or death. I do not need a lawyer to translate the truth. I will represent myself. The judge raised an eyebrow but nodded. Proceed, she said. I walked out from behind the table. I did not go to the podium. I walked straight to the witness stand where Dr. Aris was sitting, looking comfortable and secure in his lies. I stopped 3 feet from him. I let the silence stretch for a moment, letting him feel the weight of my stare. Dr. Aris, I began my tone conversational. You stated that I suffer from frontal lobe atrophy, is that correct? That is my professional opinion, yes, Aris replied, smoothing his tie. Opinion, I repeated. Interesting word. In neurosurgery. Doctor, we don't deal in opinions. We deal in imaging. We deal in pathology. You diagnosed me with a structural degeneration of the brain. Did you order an MRI? I did not have access to you to perform a scan. Aris stammered slightly. But your behavior is symptomatic. So you diagnosed a physical atrophy of the brain tissue without a T2-weighted magnetic resonance image, I pressed. Stepping closer. You diagnosed a structural failure without a CT scan, without a PET scan, without even a basic neurological exam. You are basing a medical diagnosis that would strip a man of his civil rights on stories? Behavioral observation is a valid diagnostic tool, Aris shot back. Defensiveness creeping into his voice. Observation requires presence, Doctor, I snapped. You have never met me. You have never spoken to me until this moment. Your observation consists entirely of the narrative provided by the people who stand to gain $50 million from your diagnosis. Tell me, doctor, in your medical opinion, is conflict of interest a symptom of dementia, or is it a symptom of greed? Objection, Kane shouted, jumping up. The respondent is badgering the witness. Sustained, Judge Holloway sighed. Dr. Prescott, stick to the medical facts. I am sticking to the facts. Your Honor, I said, turning to the bench, the fact is this man has offered a diagnosis of exclusion without doing any of the exclusions. He claims I am paranoid because I believe my son-in-law is trying to kill me. But paranoia is defined as a delusion without basis in reality. If someone is actually trying to kill you, Your Honor, it is not paranoia, it is survival. I turned back to Aris. One last question, Doctor. You claim my cognitive decline is rapid. Yet 2 days ago, I successfully performed a needle decompression on a tension pneumothorax at the scene of a car accident while waiting for my Uber. The police report is in the file. Does that sound like a man who has lost his executive function? Or does it sound like a man who is sharper than you are? Aris opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He looked at Kane for help. No further questions, I said, dismissing him with a wave of my hand. I returned to my table. The atmosphere in the room had shifted. The judge was looking at me with a new expression. Curiosity. I had made a dent, but I hadn't won. I needed to destroy their narrative completely. I needed to show the court the monster behind the neck brace. Your Honor, I said, picking up a flash drive from the table, the petitioners claim my accusation of poisoning is a fabrication of a diseased mind. They claim I imagined the events of my anniversary party. I would like to submit into evidence Defense Exhibit A. Kane stood up again. We have not seen this evidence. We object to a trial by ambush. It is a preliminary hearing, Mr. Kane, the judge said, waving him down. I want to see what the doctor has. I walked to the court clerk and handed her the drive. She plugged it into the system, and the large screen on the wall flickered to life. It was the footage from the security camera I had installed on the balcony 3 months ago after noticing items missing from my study. The angle was high, looking down into the ballroom. The image was black and white, but the resolution was 4K. The room went silent. On the screen, the timestamp showed 8:45 p.m. The figure of Brandon Cole stood clearly by the serving station. He looked over his shoulder. He reached into his pocket. The camera caught this glint of the crystal glass. It caught the white powder falling from his hand into the champagne. It caught the quick stir with his finger. There it is, I said, pointing at the screen. That is the loving son-in-law preparing my toast. That is fentanyl, Your Honor. That is attempted murder. Victoria gasped, covering her mouth. Evelyn stared at the screen, her face pale. For a second, I thought I had them. I thought the truth was undeniable. But Mr. Kane was expensive for a reason. He stood up slowly, a shark sensing blood in the water. He didn't look rattled. He looked bored. "Your Honor," he drawled, "this is what we are talking about. This is the paranoia." He walked toward the screen. "We see a man putting something in a drink," Kane said. "We admit that. Mr. Cole has a sweet tooth. He carries packets of stevia with him because he is watching his sugar intake. He puts sweetener in the champagne because he finds the vintage Dr. Prescott buys to be too dry. Stevia," I blurted out, losing my cool for the first time. "You are claiming he put sweetener in a $300 bottle of Cristal. It is not a crime to have bad taste." Dr. Kane smirked. "And regarding the video quality, it is from a distance. Can you identify the substance, Dr. Prescott? Did you recover the packet, or did you, as the police report states, interfere with the scene and remove items from Mr. Cole's person while pretending to render aid? He had me. He had twisted the knife perfectly. The police tested the glass." "Your Honor," Kane continued, "and yes, it contained opioids. But who is to say the doctor didn't put them there himself? He had possession of the glass. He had the medical access to the drugs. He is setting up my client to cover his own mental break. This video proves nothing, except that my client likes sweet wine." Judge Holloway looked from the screen to me. The doubt was back in her eyes. The video was damning to me, but without the packet, without a clear shot of the label, it was circumstantial. Kane had introduced enough reasonable doubt to drive a truck through. "Dr. Prescott," the judge said, rubbing her temples, "this is a very serious accusation. But Mr. Kane is right. The video is open to interpretation. And given your recent financial actions freezing your wife's assets, leaving your family destitute, it paints a picture of erratic, vindictive behavior. It is not vindictive to stop a thief." I argued, my voice rising. "Dr. Prescott, please," she warned. "Based on the testimony of Dr. Aris and the lack of concrete evidence to support your conspiracy theory, I am inclined to grant the temporary conservatorship. We need a full independent evaluation. And until that is done, I cannot allow you to manage the estate or make medical decisions. It is for your own safety." My heart hammered against my ribs. I was losing. I was standing in a court of law, watching my life being stripped away by a lie. Brandon lowered his head, hiding a smile. Evelyn let out a long, shaky breath, looking relieved that the problem was being handled. "Your Honor," I pleaded, desperation creeping in. "If you sign that order, you are signing my death warrant. He has a life insurance policy on me. He will kill me the moment he has control." "That is enough," Dr. Prescott, the judge said, picking up her pen. "These outbursts are only confirming the petitioner's claims. I am going to sign the order for a 30-day evaluation period. Mr. Cole will be appointed temporary guardian." The pen touched the paper. The gavel was raised. I looked at the door, willing a miracle to happen, willing the universe to have some sense of justice. The heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom did not just open. They were thrown wide with a violence that made the wood groan against the hinges. The sound reverberated off the paneled walls like a gunshot, shattering the suffocating silence of my legal execution. Every head turned in unison. Even Judge Holloway froze her pen, hovering millimeters above the order that would have ended my life as a free man. Standing in the threshold was a woman who looked like she had crawled out of a nightmare. It was Sarah. I recognized her from the dossier my private investigator had compiled, but the vibrant, ambitious executive assistant in the photos was gone. In her place stood a broken survivor. Her left eye was swollen shut, a bulbous mass of purple and black bruising that distorted her entire face. Her lower lip was split wide open, caked with dried blood. She wore a trench coat that was buttoned wrong, and she was clutching her side as if her ribs were shattered. She limped down the center aisle, her breathing ragged and loud in the silent room. The bailiff moved to intercept her, his hand reaching for his belt, but she didn't stop. She raised a shaking hand, holding a cracked smartphone like a weapon. "I object," she screamed, her voice cracking with pain and hysteria. "I object to this entire charade." Sarah Brandon gasped. The color drained from his face so fast, it looked like the blood had simply evaporated. For the first time since the proceedings began, he forgot his role. He forgot the neck brace. He forgot the wheelchair. He leaped to his feet, standing straight and tall, his agility miraculous for a man who claimed to be crippled. "Shut your mouth, Sarah!" he roared, his voice losing its polished veneer and revealing the thug beneath. "Get out of here!" "Sit down, Mr. Cole!" Judge Holloway shouted, banging her gavel with a force that made the water pitcher jump. Bailiff let her speak. "Who are you, young woman?" Sarah reached the railing that separated the gallery from the court. She gripped the wood with white knuckles, using it to hold herself upright. She didn't look at the judge. She didn't look at me. Her one good eye was locked on Victoria, my daughter, who was staring at her husband, standing perfectly still, the miraculous healing of his neck forgotten in the panic of the moment. "I am the woman he promised to marry." Sarah spat blood, flecking her chin. "I am the woman he has been sleeping with for 2 years while you played house. I am the reason he needed that $50 million. The courtroom erupted into whispers. Mr. Kane Brandon's high-priced lawyer dropped his expensive pen. He looked at his client, then at the door, calculating his exit strategy. "She is lying," Brandon yelled, desperation making his voice shrill. "She is a disgruntled employee. She is crazy. She is stalking me." "I am not crazy," Sarah sobbed, tears cutting tracks through the blood on her cheek. "But I was stupid. I believed him. He told me he loved me. He told me he was only with you, Victoria, because of the money. He said he had a plan to get rid of the old man." She turned to the judge, holding up her phone. Her hand shook violently. "He did this to me." "Your Honor," she cried, gesturing to her ruined face. "He came to my apartment last night. He was in a rage. He tried to use his credit cards to book our flight to the Maldives, but they were declined. He told me the old man had frozen everything. He told me the accounts were locked. He blamed me. He punched me until I couldn't see. He kicked me until I couldn't breathe. He said he had to finish the job today in court because he needed the power of attorney to unlock the cash." Brandon lunged toward the railing, his face twisted in a snarl. "You shut up or I will kill you." The bailiff tackled him before he could take 2 steps. They went down in a tangle of limbs, the wheelchair overturning with a loud crash. Brandon struggled, cursing, but the officer pinned him to the floor. "I have the texts," Sarah screamed over the commotion. "I have the proof. Read them. Read what he wrote to me right before the toast." She fumbled with the phone and swiped the screen. She pressed a button, and because the phone was connected to the courtroom's Bluetooth system for evidence display, a mechanical voice began to read the message aloud over the speakers. It was Brandon's voice, recorded as a voice note. "Babe, it is almost done. The old man is about to turn into a vegetable. I spiked the glass. Just 10 more minutes and 50 million is ours. Pack your bags for the Maldives. I am finally going to be free of that frigid wife and her fossil of a father." The audio cut off. The silence that followed was heavier than anything I had ever felt. It was the silence of a truth so ugly it sucked the air out of the room. Judge Holloway looked at the phone, then at me. The doubt in her eyes was gone, replaced by horror and apology. Victoria stood up slowly. Her movements were jerky, uncoordinated. She looked at the woman with the battered face. She looked at the man pinned to the floor, the man who had claimed to love her, the man she had defended against her own father. The reality of her life crashed down on her. The years of gaslighting, the isolation, the belief that she was loved. It was all a lie. Her marriage was a crime scene. Her husband was a monster. And her father, the man she had tried to institutionalize, was the only one who had tried to save her. She turned to look at me. Her face was as white as a sheet of paper. Her lips moved, trying to form the word "Dad," but no sound came out. "Victoria," I said, stepping toward her, my heart breaking. Her eyes rolled back into her head. Her knees buckled. She didn't just faint. She collapsed like a building whose foundations had been detonated. She hit the floor hard. Her body went rigid, then began to convulse violently. "Vicky," I shouted, vaulting over the defense table with an agility I didn't know I still possessed. She was seizing. A grand mal seizure, brought on by acute psychological shock. Her head banged against the floorboards. I was by her side in a second. I wasn't a defendant anymore. I was a doctor. I slid my jacket under her head to cushion the blows. I turned her onto her side to keep her airway clear. "Call 911. I bellowed at the judge. "Get a crash cart. Now." Evelyn sat in her chair, frozen, staring at the scene with empty glass eyes. Her world had ended. But mine was just beginning. I held my daughter as she shook, whispering that I was there, that I had her, that the nightmare was over. But as I looked at Brandon, who was now being handcuffed by 2 more officers, I knew the nightmare had simply changed shape. We had won the battle in court, but the casualties were catastrophic. Victoria was broken. Evelyn was catatonic. And I was the only one left standing to pick up the pieces of a family that had been shattered by a toast. The sterile beep of the cardiac monitor was the only sound in the private recovery room, a rhythmic counterpoint to the storm raging inside my head. Victoria lay pale and small against the white sheets, looking more like the teenager I remembered than the 38-year-old woman she had become. I sat in the uncomfortable vinyl chair, holding her hand, watching the rise and fall of her chest, with the obsession of a doctor monitoring a critical patient. When her eyelids finally fluttered open, the confusion in them cleared quickly, replaced by a crushing wave of reality. She tried to pull her hand away, shame coloring her cheeks, but I held on tight. I was not going to let her go. Not again. "Dad," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I am so sorry. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know about the poison." "I know, Vicky," I said softly, using the nickname I hadn't spoken in a decade. "I know you didn't." She began to weep, then, not the hysterical sobbing of the courtroom, but a deep, mournful release of years of accumulated pain. She told me everything. She told me how Brandon hadn't just seduced her with charm. He had systematically dismantled her self-worth. It started with small criticisms about her weight, her intelligence, her choices. Then came the isolation. He told her I was disappointed in her. He told her I thought she was a failure who lived off my money. He monitored her calls. He tracked her car. He created a world where he was her only ally, and I was the distant, judgmental patriarch she needed to protect him from. "He made me afraid of you," she confessed, squeezing my hand so hard her knuckles turned white. "He said if I ever left him, he would ruin your reputation. He said he had dirt on you. He used my love for you as a weapon against me." I listened, feeling a cold fury building in my gut, sharper and deeper than anything I had felt during the poisoning attempt. I had been so focused on my career, on building an empire to leave her, that I hadn't noticed the wolf eating my family from the inside. I had failed to protect her from a predator because I was too busy being a provider. I leaned forward and brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, my thumb tracing the line of her jaw where stress had carved premature lines. "It is over now," I promised her. "He can never hurt you again. You are safe. I am here." We sat there for a moment in the fragile peace of reconciliation, a father and daughter finding each other across a battlefield of lies. But peace, I should have known, is a luxury we could not yet afford. The door to the room did not open with the soft swoosh of the pneumatic closer. It slammed open. I turned, expecting a nurse or a doctor. Instead, I found myself looking into the eyes of a cornered animal. It was Brandon. He was supposed to be in police custody, or at least being processed at the precinct. But here he was, standing in the doorway of room 405, breathing hard sweat, plastering his hair to his forehead. He was still wearing the suit from the courtroom, but the tie was gone, the shirt torn at the collar. He looked manic, his eyes darting around the room, vibrating with the chaotic energy of a man who knows he has no moves left. "You," he spat, pointing at me. "This is all your fault." Brandon Victoria gasped, shrinking back into her pillows. "How did you get in here?" "They let me out on bail," he lied, his voice high and unstable. "Or maybe I walked out while they were doing the paperwork. It doesn't matter. What matters is that I need cash, and I need a hostage." He stepped into the room and kicked the door shut behind him. He dragged a heavy chair in front of it, jamming it under the handle. We were trapped. "Get up, Vicky," he ordered, moving toward the bed. "We are leaving. You are going to drive me to the airport, and you are going to withdraw the daily limit from every ATM on the way." "You are insane," I said, standing up slowly, putting myself between him and the bed. "You are not taking her anywhere. The police are on their way." "Move, old man," Brandon sneered. "You got lucky in court. You got lucky with the champagne. But your luck just ran out. I am not leaving here empty-handed." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a fruit knife. It wasn't a tactical weapon. It was a cheap, serrated steak knife likely stolen from a cafeteria tray or a break room. But in the hands of a desperate man, 3 inches of steel is enough to end a life. The blade glinted under the fluorescent lights. I raised my hands, palms open, adopting a non-threatening posture. My mind, however, was shifting gears. I wasn't 70 years old anymore. I was a surgeon assessing a trauma. I scanned his body language. He was favoring his right leg. He was shaking. He was high on adrenaline and possibly withdrawal. He was dangerous, but he was sloppy. "Brandon, look at yourself," I said. My voice calm, authoritative. "You are holding a steak knife in a hospital room. There is no escape. If you hurt us, you go away for life. If you put the knife down, you might only do 20 years. Think about the math." "I don't care about the math," he screamed, lunging forward. "I want my wife." He tried to shove past me to get to Victoria. I didn't move. I stood my ground, a wall of tweed and bone. He swung the knife wild and clumsy. I dodged, but not fast enough. The blade caught the sleeve of my jacket, slicing through the fabric, but missing the skin. Victoria screamed. "Dad, stay back!" "Victoria," I shouted without looking at her. Brandon recovered his balance and turned on me. The desperation in his eyes hardened into murderous intent. He realized I was the only thing standing between him and his freedom. "Fine," he hissed. "I wanted to kill you quietly, but I am happy to do it loud." He charged. This time there was no finesse. He came at me like a linebacker, the knife held low, aiming for my gut. I had split seconds. I couldn't outrun him. I couldn't overpower him. I had to disable him. To my right was a stainless steel mayo stand, a tray on wheels used for medical supplies. It held a pitcher of water, a plastic cup, and a kidney dish. I grabbed the cold metal rim of the tray. As Brandon closed the distance, I didn't retreat. I stepped into his attack. I swung the tray with every ounce of strength left in my aging body. I didn't aim for his head. The skull is hard. It breaks fingers and bends metal. I aimed for the anatomy I knew best. I aimed for the larynx, the voice box, a structure made of cartilage and soft tissue, vulnerable, exposed. The edge of the steel tray connected with his throat with a sickening crunch. It was the sound of crushing cartilage. Brandon's forward momentum stopped instantly. His eyes bulged. He dropped the knife, clutching his throat with both hands, making a terrible, wet, gasping sound. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't scream. He collapsed to his knees, gagging his face, turning a dark shade of red. But even as he fell, his flailing arm struck out one last time. I felt a sharp, burning sting in my lower abdomen. I looked down. My shirt was wet. Red was blooming across the white cotton, spreading fast. The knife, as it fell from his hand, or perhaps in his last desperate slash, had found a home in my side. I staggered back, clutching the wound. The pain was sudden and blinding, a hot poker shoved into my gut. My legs felt weak. I slumped against the wall, sliding down until I hit the floor. Dad Victoria scrambled out of bed, ripping the IV from her arm. She rushed to me, her hands pressing over mine, trying to staunch the flow. Dad, stay with me, help somebody, help. The barricaded door rattled. Then with a mighty crash, it burst open. Security guards and police officers flooded the room, guns drawn. They saw Brandon writhing on the floor, clutching his crushed throat. They saw me bleeding out against the wall. "Get a gurney," an officer shouted. "We have an officer down." "No civilian down, stab wound." I looked at Victoria. Her face was hovering above mine, tears falling onto my cheeks. She looked terrified, but she was acting. She was applying pressure. She was checking my pulse. She was doing exactly what I had taught her when she was a little girl and scraped her knee. She was surviving. "I am okay," I wheezed, the room starting to spin. It missed the liver. Just the oblique muscle. I diagnosed myself even as the darkness crept in at the edges of my vision. "Don't talk, Dad, please," she sobbed. I looked past her at Brandon. The police were handcuffing him, dragging him up. He was still gasping, unable to speak, defeated by an old man and a metal tray. Our eyes met one last time. There was no arrogance left in him, only fear. I closed my eyes, letting the darkness take me for a moment. I had won. I had saved her. And as the trauma team lifted me onto the stretcher, I knew that for the first time in a long time, the Prescott family was going to be all right. We were broken, yes. We were bleeding. But the tumor had been removed. Now the healing could begin. The fluorescent lights of the hospital hallway hummed with a frequency that seemed to vibrate against my fresh stitches. I sat on the edge of the gurney, buttoning a clean shirt that Lucius had brought me, wincing as the fabric brushed against the bandage on my shin. The wound was shallow, a lucky escape, but the ache was deep, settling into my bones. Through the open door of the treatment room, I could see the activity at the nurses' station. 2 uniformed officers were filling out paperwork, their faces grim. They had just taken Brandon away. There would be no bail this time. Attempted murder, kidnapping, assault with a deadly weapon, all committed in front of witnesses in a hospital, no less. The judge had seen enough. Brandon Cole was gone, dragged screaming into the night, leaving behind a wake of destruction that would take years to clear. Standing just outside the door, hovering like a ghost, haunting the scene of its own death, was Evelyn. She looked small. The imperious, demanding woman who had slapped me in our foyer just 24 hours ago had vanished. In her place was a trembling elderly woman clutching a designer handbag that now seemed like a ridiculous prop in a tragedy. She was staring at the blood-stained shirt I had discarded on the floor. Her eyes moved from the crimson fabric to my face, then to the empty space where her son-in-law had been standing. The cognitive dissonance was breaking her. She had spent months convincing herself that I was the villain, the jealous old tyrant standing in the way of her family's happiness. She had financed the attack on me. She had handed the knife to the man who just tried to gut me. And now the reality was staring her in the face, undeniable and bloody. She had protected the wolf. She had opened the door, invited him in, and fed him only to watch him try to devour the flock. I stood up slowly, testing my legs. I walked to the door. Evelyn flinched as I approached, as if she expected me to strike her. I didn't. I didn't have the energy for violence. I looked at her with a profound, exhausting pity. "Harrison," she whispered, her voice a broken rasp. "I didn't know. You have to believe me. I thought he loved us." "You thought what you wanted to think, Evelyn," I said, my voice hoarse. "You wanted to be the cool mother. You wanted the exciting son-in-law. You wanted to believe I was irrelevant because it made you feel powerful to conspire against me." She began to weep, ugly, gasping sobs that shook her thin frame. She reached out a hand to touch my arm, but I stepped back. I could not bear her touch. It felt tainted. "Please, Harrison," she begged. We can fix this. He is gone now. It is just us. We can go back to how it was. I will make it up to you. I will sign whatever you want. Just take me home." I looked at her, and I realized she still didn't understand the magnitude of what she had done. She thought this was just an emotional betrayal, something that could be smoothed over with time and apologies. She didn't realize she had burned the bridge while she was standing on it. "There is no home to go back to, Evelyn," I said quietly. "What do you mean?" I sniffled, wiping her eyes. "The estate." "I am not talking about my house," I interrupted. "I am talking about your house. The cottage in Rhode Island. The one your parents left you. The one you said you would never sell because it held all your childhood memories." She froze. Her eyes darted back and forth, panic rising. "Why? Why are you bringing that up?" I reached into the pocket of my jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It wasn't medical. It was financial. Lucius had handed it to me along with the shirt. It was a notice of default from the bank. "I saw the transaction logs, Evelyn," I said, unfolding the paper and holding it up for her to see. 3 months ago, you signed a second mortgage on the Rhode Island property. You took out a line of credit for $2 million. She went pale, her hand flying to her mouth. "He told me it was a bridge loan," she stammered. "For a real estate deal. He said it was a sure thing. Triple returns in 6 months. He just needed my signature because his capital was tied up. He promised to pay it back next week." "There was no deal, Evelyn," I said ruthlessly. "There was no investment. He used that money to pay off a loan shark in Vegas. The money is gone. And since you haven't made a payment in 90 days, the bank has initiated foreclosure proceedings. They are taking the house on Monday." She stared at the paper, shaking her head in denial. "No. No, he wouldn't. He swore on his mother's life. That house, my father built that porch. My mother planted those hydrangeas. It is all I have left of them." "It is gone," I repeated, forcing her to look at the truth. "You gave your legacy to a con man because he complimented your dress and called you Mom. You signed away your history to buy his affection. And now you have nothing." Evelyn collapsed. She didn't faint this time. She just crumpled, sliding down the wall until she was a heap of silk and regret on the sterile hospital floor. She wailed a sound of pure mourning for the life she had dismantled with her own hands. "Harrison, help me," she cried, looking up at me from the floor. "Pay it off. You have the money. You can save the house, please, for the sake of 40 years. I looked down at her. I thought about the check she wrote to the lawyer to put me in a home. I thought about the slap in the foyer. I thought about the poison in the glass. I could save it, I admitted. I could write a check right now and make the problem go away. But I won't. Her eyes widened in horror. Why? Because stupidity has a price, Evelyn. I said, my voice hard as granite. And you have never paid a bill in your life. You have lived in a bubble I created, protected from the consequences of your actions. Well, the bubble just popped. The price of your betrayal is everything you own. You made a bet against me, and you lost. I am not going to bail you out. You are going to lose that house, and you are going to watch it happen, and maybe, just maybe, you will finally learn that trust is something you earn, not something you spend. I turned and walked away, leaving her sobbing on the floor of the hallway. I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I looked back, the part of me that still remembered the girl in the white dress might waver. And I couldn't afford to waver. I had to be the surgeon. I had to cut out the rot. I spent the night in a hotel across from the hospital, keeping a vigil over Victoria's recovery, but refusing to see Evelyn. The next morning, the news broke. It wasn't on the front page, but it was there, buried in the metro section. A death in custody at the county jail. Lucius called me at 7 a.m. His voice was grim, but there was an undercurrent of finality to it. "It is done," Harrison Lucius said. "Brandon Cole is dead." I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, the phone pressed to my ear. "How?" I asked. "Official report says he slipped in the shower," Lucius said. "Hit his head. Severe trauma to the temple. No witnesses. The guards didn't find him until morning." I closed my eyes. A slip in the shower. It was the oldest story in the book. It was neat. It was tidy. And it was impossible. Brandon was young, healthy, and desperate to talk. He would have been trading secrets for a plea deal the moment he woke up. He would have told the prosecutors everything about the fraud, the attempted murder, and probably things we didn't even know. He was a loose end, and Dante Falcone did not like loose ends. I remembered the conversation in the Italian restaurant. I remembered asking Dante to silence him, to make sure the files from 1998 never saw the light of day. I had asked for fear. I had asked for intimidation. But Dante operated by his own code. He knew that a man like Brandon, a man who would poison his own father-in-law, could never be trusted to keep a secret no matter how scared he was. Dead men don't testify. Dead men don't leak files to the press. He slipped. I repeated the words, feeling heavy on my tongue. "Yes," Lucius said. "Just a tragic accident. The medical examiner has already signed off. Accidental death. Case closed. The criminal charges will be dropped. The state stops prosecuting when the defendant is deceased. And the files," I asked. "The documents he found in the basement. They were found in his personal effects when he was booked," Lucius said. "The police considered them irrelevant to the poisoning case. They have been returned to the estate as personal property of the victim. I have them in my safe, Harrison. They are secure." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. The secret of 1998 was safe. My reputation was safe. The Falcone legacy was safe. But the cost. The cost was a human life. Brandon was a monster, yes. He was a thief and a would-be killer. But he was also a man who had once sat at my dinner table. And in a way, I had signed his death warrant just as surely as I had signed the order to freeze the accounts. "It is over," Harrison Lucius said gently. "You are in the clear." "Is it oh?" I asked, looking out the window at the city waking up. "The criminal case is over, Lucius. But the mess he left behind, the debts, the foreclosure, the broken women, that doesn't disappear because he slipped in a shower." "No," Lucius agreed. "That is the hangover. And it is going to be a long one." I hung up the phone. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I had won the war. The enemy was dead. My fortune was secure. But as I prepared to go back to the hospital to tell my daughter that she was a widow, I realized that victory in this kind of war didn't feel like triumph. It felt like survival. It felt like walking away from a car crash with your life but leaving a part of yourself in the wreckage. I stood up and went to the mirror. I adjusted my tie. I checked my bandage. The bleeding had stopped. The wound would heal. I was Harrison Prescott. I was a survivor. And now I had a mess to clean up. Brandon was dead, buried in a pauper's grave because I refused to claim the body, but his ghosts were still very much alive, and they were hungry. They didn't come with subpoenas or lawsuits. They came with threats whispered over burner phones and black SUVs parked outside Victoria's rental apartment. The gambling debts Brandon had accrued weren't just numbers on a screen. They were owed to men who didn't care about death certificates. They wanted their money, and they looked at his widow as the next best thing to a payment plan. I knew I had to act not as a father, but as a surgeon, performing a debridement, cutting away the dead tissue to save the limb. I made the decision standing in the foyer of the Connecticut estate, the very place where the poisoning had happened. The house felt cold, tainted by the memory of that night. It wasn't a home anymore. It was a crime scene wrapped in silk wallpaper. I called a real estate broker I knew, a woman who specialized in discreet cash-only sales to international buyers. I told her I wanted it gone. Furniture, art, wine cellar, everything included. I accepted an offer that was 20% below market value because the buyer promised to close in 48 hours. When the wire transfer hit my account, I didn't celebrate. I took a portion of that money, a significant portion, and I arranged a meeting through Dante Falcone. I didn't go myself. I sent an intermediary to a warehouse in South Boston. The debts to the loan sharks were paid in full in cash with a strict message attached. The Prescott family was now off limits. It was blood money paid to wash away the sins of a man I despised, but it bought Victoria's safety. As for the banks, the credit card companies, and the legitimate lenders Brandon had defrauded, I let them starve. I refused to pay a single cent of his legal debts. Let them chase a ghost. With the physical danger neutralized, I turned my attention to the survivor. Victoria was living in a small motel room, terrified and broke. She came to me a week after the sale of the house, her eyes downcast, asking for a loan to get an apartment. She looked fragile, broken by the revelation that her entire marriage had been a long con. It would have been easy to write her a check to set her up in a nice condo and let her hide from the world. But I knew that would be the worst thing I could do. She had been dependent on men her whole life, first me, then Brandon. If I carried her now, she would never learn to walk. I sat her down in the temporary office I had set up in my hotel suite. I told her I would not give her money. Her face fell, a look of abandonment crossing her features that almost broke my resolve. But then I slid a contract across the table. It was a loan agreement structured with interest, albeit low, and a strict repayment schedule. I told her I would pay for her tuition, to retake her nursing board exams, and get recertified. I would lend her enough for a modest apartment and expenses for 6 months. After that, she was on her own. She looked at the contract, then at me. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. For the first time in years, I saw a spark of the grit she had possessed before Brandon crushed it out of her. She signed it. The next day, she did something that made me prouder than any society marriage could have. She took her collection of Birkin bags, her diamond tennis bracelets, and the Cartier watch Brandon had bought her with stolen money, and she sold them. She didn't ask me for help. She went to a reseller and negotiated the price herself. She used that money to buy scrubs, a stethoscope, and a used Honda Civic. She was starting over not as an heiress, but as a woman. She was tired, she was grieving, but she was real. I thought the surgery was complete. I thought we had cut out all the rot. But there was one final malignant secret waiting to be discovered. Lucius called me to his office late on a Friday afternoon. His voice on the phone had been strange, lacking its usual confident cadence. When I arrived, he didn't pour drinks. He handed me a medical file. It was a toxicology report, but not mine and not Brandon's. The name at the top read Evelyn Prescott. I looked at Lucius, confused. Why did you test Evelyn? Because Harrison, Lucius said, leaning against his desk, his face grim. It never made sense to me. Evelyn is vain, yes. She is concerned with status, but she loved you. For 40 years she was your partner. The speed with which she turned on you, the irrational aggression, the paranoia she mirrored from Brandon. It didn't fit the psychological profile of the woman I have known for decades. It felt induced. I opened the file. It was a hair follicle analysis, a test that can trace drug exposure over months, even years. My eyes scanned the columns of data. Positive, 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 benzodiazepines, barbiturates, and a high level of scopolamine. My hands began to shake. Scopolamine. The devil's breath. A drug used to treat motion sickness in tiny doses, but in higher doses it renders the subject docile, compliant, and highly suggestible. It breaks down the will. It makes people obedient zombies. He was drugging her, I whispered, the horror constricting my throat. Lucius nodded. We checked the kitchen at the estate before the sale closed. We found a container of her special herbal tea blend. It was laced. He has been poisoning her for at least 2 years, Harrison. He wasn't just manipulating her emotionally. He was chemically altering her brain chemistry to make her pliable. He turned your wife into a puppet so he could use her against you. I felt a wave of nausea. The slap in the foyer, the coldness, the betrayal. It wasn't entirely her. She had been under the influence of a chemical lobotomy administered by the man she treated like a son. She wasn't just an enabler. She was a victim violated in the most intimate way possible. I drove to the small, dingy apartment where Evelyn was living. It was the only place she could afford on her reduced Social Security check. I found her sitting by the window staring at a blank wall. She looked thin, frail, a shadow of the vibrant hostess she used to be. The withdrawal from the drugs must have been brutal, masquerading as depression and grief. I didn't knock. I walked in and sat down opposite her. She looked at me with fear, expecting another lecture, another reminder of her failure. I didn't say a word. I simply placed the toxicology report in her lap. She picked it up, reading it with shaking hands. She didn't understand the chemical names at first. I explained it to her. I told her about the tea. I told her about the compliance, the confusion, the memory gaps she must have felt. I told her that Brandon hadn't just stolen her money. He had stolen her mind. As the realization sank in, the dam broke. It wasn't the selfish crying of a woman who lost her house. It was a primal scream of violation. She realized that her affection for Brandon, her defense of him, her hatred of me, it had all been manufactured. She had been a lab rat in his experiment to destroy our family. She curled into a ball on the cheap sofa, wailing, tearing at her own hair, as if she could rip the poison out of her follicles. "I am sorry," she screamed over and over again. "I didn't know. I couldn't think." It was like a fog. "I am so sorry, Harrison." I watched her, and the anger I had held onto for months finally began to dissolve, replaced by a profound sadness. We had both been played. I reached out and took her hand. It was thin and cold. I didn't offer reconciliation. I didn't say, "Come home." That bridge was burned, and trust is not something that can be rebuilt on a foundation of chemicals and trauma. But I offered her forgiveness. "I will make sure that you have better doctors," I said quietly. "We will get the drugs out of your system. You will clear your head, Evelyn, and then you will learn to live again. But you will do it alone." I left her there weeping, but lucid, finally free of the chemical chains that had bound her. I walked out into the cool evening air. The debts were paid. The children were safe. The truth was out. The mess was cleaned up. But as I looked at the city skyline, I knew that the stain of Brandon Cole would never truly wash away. We survived, but we were all scarred. And sometimes scars are the only inheritance that really lasts. 1 year can feel like a lifetime, or a blink of an eye, depending on the scars you carry. I stood on the terrace of my new home, a penthouse overlooking the harbor, and inhaled the salt air. The silence here was different from the silence at the estate. That silence had been heavy, suffocating, filled with unspoken resentments and hidden betrayals. This silence was clean. It was the sound of freedom. The apartment was stark minimalist. No Persian rugs to be stained with poison, no ornate furniture to hide secrets. Just glass, steel, and the endless horizon. I had retired from surgery. My hands were still steady, but my heart was no longer in the operating theater. Instead, I had taken a position as a senior medical consultant for a biotech firm developing non-invasive neurological treatments. It kept my mind sharp, my days structured, and it allowed me to use my decades of experience without the life-or-death pressure that had consumed me for so long. I went to the office 3 days a week. I read journals. I lectured occasionally. I was, for the first time in 40 years, just Harrison. Not the doctor, not the provider. Just a man living his life on his own terms. I checked my watch. It was 6:00 p.m. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. I walked to the small bar cart in the corner. There were no servants here, no waiters to serve drinks with a smile and a hidden agenda. I picked up a bottle of champagne. It wasn't Cristal. It was a decent vintage, nothing ostentatious. I popped the cork myself, the sound crisp and satisfying in the quiet room. As I poured the golden liquid into a simple flute, my thoughts drifted to the wreckage I had left behind. Evelyn was living in a one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood she used to drive through with her nose wrinkled in distaste. We were legally separated, the divorce proceedings moving slowly, but inevitably, toward a final decree. I paid her alimony enough to keep her fed and housed, but not enough for country clubs or designer clothes. She was learning to budget. She was learning to cook. I heard through Victoria that she had burned her first 3 attempts at pasta, but last week she successfully baked a chicken. It was a small victory, pathetic in the grand scheme of things, but for a woman who had been chemically and emotionally infantilized for years, it was progress. We spoke occasionally, brief, polite conversations about logistics. The drugs were out of her system, and with clarity came a profound, quiet shame that kept her at a distance. She was rebuilding herself from the ground up, a painful process for a woman of 65, but necessary. Victoria had surprised me the most. She had passed her nursing boards on the first try, fueled by a determination I hadn't seen since she was a child, learning to ride a bike. She was working the night shift in the ER at City General, the very place where her husband had tried to kill me. It was grueling work, physically and emotionally draining, and the pay was a fraction of what she was used to spending on shoes. But when I saw her last week for coffee, there was a light in her eyes that hadn't been there before. The hollow, fearful look of a victim was gone. She was tired, yes, but she was proud. She was standing on her own feet, paying her own rent, raising her son, without the shadow of a monster looming over them. She had sold the last of her jewelry to pay off the final installment of her loan to me. She didn't want charity. She wanted respect, and she had earned it. I took my glass and walked back to the terrace railing. The wind whipped at my jacket. I thought about the $50 million sitting in the trust. It was a fortune that had almost cost me my life. It was a magnet for greed, a catalyst for betrayal. I knew I couldn't leave it as a simple inheritance. That would be like handing a loaded gun to a child. Yesterday I had signed the final papers for the Harrison Prescott Trust. Lucius had argued against it, calling it draconian, but he had drafted it exactly as I asked. The terms were ironclad. Upon my death, the entire principal, the full $50 million, would be donated to the Neurological Research Institute for the study of addiction and brain trauma. Not a penny of the capital would go to my family. However, the interest generated by the trust would be available to them, but with strict conditions. To receive a monthly stipend, any beneficiary, Victoria, Evelyn, or my grandchildren, would have to submit proof of full-time employment or full-time education. They would have to pass annual drug screenings. They would have to submit financial audits proving they were living within their means. If they worked, the trust would match their salary dollar for dollar. If they sat around waiting for a handout, they would get nothing. It was a safety net, not a hammock. It was designed to reward effort, not entitlement. It was my way of ensuring that the cycle of dependency and greed that Brandon had exploited would end with me. I was not leaving them a fortune to fight over. I was leaving them an incentive to build their own lives. I looked at the champagne bubbling in my glass. It was clean. It was pure. I didn't need to check for sediment. I didn't need to watch anyone's hands. I was safe. But I knew that safety was an illusion, a temporary state of being. The world was full of Brandons, full of people who would smile to your face while plotting your demise. I raised the glass to the setting sun, the light refracting through the crystal in a dazzling prism. I thought of the man who had tried to kill me with a toast. I thought of the wife who had paid for my destruction. I thought of the daughter who had found her strength in the ashes. The enemy is not the man with the knife in a dark alley, I whispered to the empty air. The enemy is the one who pours your wine with a smile. the one who calls you family. I took a sip. It tasted like victory. It tasted like survival. Cheers, I said, to the first year of the rest of my life. I drained the glass and set it down on the railing. Below me, the city lights began to twinkle on a million little stars in a vast, dark ocean. I was alone, but I was not lonely. I was Harrison Prescott. I was awake, and I was ready for whatever came next. We often think providing for our family means giving them everything. But I learned the hard way that an easy life can breed monsters. My son-in-law saw me as a paycheck, not a person, and my wife was blinded by the illusion of a perfect family. Real love isn't about blind loyalty. It's about holding people accountable. By cutting them off, I didn't just save my fortune. I saved my daughter's soul. Never let your generosity become your weakness. Trust is precious. Don't give it to those who haven't earned it. Sometimes you have to let people fall so they can finally learn how to stand. If you enjoyed watching me turn the tables on the man who tried to take everything, smash that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of justice. What would you do if you found out your family was plotting against you? Let me know in the comments below.